Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Laura Makin-Isherwood, and in this bulletin we'll get you a roundup on the stories developing around the world. But first, the headlines. At least 7 people have been killed and more than 140 others injured after security forces opened fire at protesters opposing the military takeover in Sudan. A virtual summit of Southeast Asian leaders, Asean, begins without a Myanmar representative after the bloc decided to exclude the country's junta chief. In the latest high-level visit, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meets with his Talibani counterpart, Amir Khan Muttaqi, and holds talks with Deputy Prime Minister Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson warns that the upcoming COP26 summit could fail. He says that nations are yet to meet their emissions targets. Glasgow City in Scotland will be hosting the crucial climate talks in less than a week from now. Meanwhile, Australia has set a 2050 net zero emissions target just days before the nation's Prime Minister Scott Morrison departs for that United Nations COP26 climate summit. Southeast Asian leaders have kick-started their annual ASEAN summit without a representative from Myanmar this time. The development comes after the bloc barred Myanmar from sending its top general to the meeting over the military's failure to follow a regional peace deal. In a sudden move on October the 15th, ASEAN agreed to exclude Myanmar's military chief Min Aung Hlaing, who toppled the country's civilian government following the February the 1st military coup over his failure to implement a peace process. The move is a rare, bold step by ASEAN, which has always maintained a stance of non-interference towards its member states' internal politics. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden is all set to take part in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN summit, later today. This will be the first time in 4 years that Washington will engage at the top-level dialogue with a regional bloc that it sees as a key ally to counter China's aggression. The US Embassy in Brunei told Reuters that Biden will lead the US delegation for the ASEAN United States summit, part of a series of ASEAN leaders' meetings taking place this week. The US has not joined the meetings at presidential level since Biden's predecessor Donald Trump attended the meeting in Manila in 2017. According to a White House statement, Biden is expected to address the United States' commitments to the bloc in improving regional affairs and also the development of new initiatives to strengthen the US strategic partnership with the region. He is also likely to focus on vaccine distribution, supply chain infrastructure, and ongoing climate crisis during the meeting. It's been over 2 months since the Taliban took over in Kabul, but the group is still struggling to get international recognition. In the latest effort by the Taliban leadership, a Chinese delegation met the Taliban's top leaders in the Qatari capital of Doha. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met the Taliban's acting Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi. Earlier, the Chinese Foreign Minister also met Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the acting Deputy Prime Minister of the Taliban government. During the meeting, apart from trade and investment, the two sides discussed the current political and economic situation in Afghanistan. According to a Taliban spokesperson, the Chinese Foreign Minister pledged humanitarian assistance to Afghans. The Chinese Foreign Minister said that Afghanistan stands at a critical stage of transforming from chaos to governance. However, the country right now is also facing multiple challenges: the humanitarian crisis, economic chaos, terrorist threats and governance difficulties. Wang added that overcoming these challenges requires support from the international community, calling on countries to engage with the Afghan Taliban in a rational and pragmatic manner. China has also urged the United States and the West to lift sanctions. This is in the wake of humanitarian difficulties Afghanistan is facing at present. The Chinese official also urged the Taliban to adopt a friendly policy towards its neighbouring countries. WION's correspondent Anas Malik sent us this report from Kabul.
China and Afghanistan are holding talks at a very senior level. The Afghan Taliban delegation is currently in Doha. Yesterday, they held talks and met with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his accompanying delegation, where a range of issues that includes the economic condition, the humanitarian crisis, unfreezing of Afghan assets, and Afghan soil being used by terror-linked elements, especially ETIM, was discussed with the Afghan side, by the Chinese side. Today, in the breakfast meeting, we're seeing that Amir Khan Muttaqi, the Taliban's foreign minister, is holding talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, and they are discussing bilateral relations, economic conditions, humanitarian aid, and other issues. This is falling short of recognition, and this meeting comes just hours before when an important meeting on Afghanistan is to be convened by Iran, which would have regional countries, especially Afghanistan's neighbors, those who share porous borders with Afghanistan, their foreign ministers in participation, and with the absence of the Afghan Taliban, they would be discussing Afghanistan. So hours before that meeting, this meeting taking place with the Chinese side holds all greater significance. Anas Malik in Kabul, Afghanistan, for WION World is One.
At least 7 people have been killed and over 140 have been wounded by gunfire in clashes between soldiers and protesters in Khartoum. Demonstrators hit the streets calling to overthrow the military takeover of the country. Massive protests broke out after Sudan's top general declared a state of emergency and dissolved the parliament. The UN Security Council is likely to discuss the Sudan crisis behind closed doors.
Global powers have condemned a military coup in Sudan and called on security forces to release those who were detained unlawfully. On Monday, the U.S. State Department released a joint statement co-signed by the U.K. and Norway. A department spokesperson added it was pausing $700 million in economic aid to Sudan after the country's military seized power from a transitional government earlier in the day. Clashes broke out Monday between soldiers and street protesters. A health official said several people were killed by gunfire. Al-Tayeb Mohammed Ahmed was among a crowd of young people who barricaded streets in protest.
They fired stun grenades, then they fired live ammunition. 2 people died. I saw them with my own eyes. Then they came back twice and killed 1 more. This is the 3rd one I saw.
Sudan had been on edge since a failed coup plot only a month before. Military and civilian groups have been sharing power following the toppling of autocrat leader Omar al-Bashir 2 years ago. The military was meant to hand over power to an elected figure in the coming months. But on Monday, coup leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan dissolved the Sovereign Council, declared a state of emergency, and promised to hand over power to an elected body in 2023.
We're stressing here that the armed forces intend to complete the democratic transition until the country's leadership is handed over to an elected civilian government who can bring these issues to life.
Sudan's information ministry said on Facebook that the transitional constitution only allows ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok to declare a state of emergency and called the military's actions a crime. The ministry said Hamdok was detained in an undisclosed location after refusing to support the takeover. Troops also arrested civilian members of the Sovereign Council, government officials, and the state TV news director, according to his family. Diplomats said the UN Security Council was likely to discuss Sudan behind closed doors on Tuesday.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro is in controversy again, this time over his latest video where the leader claimed that COVID vaccines were linked to developing AIDS. Social media giants Facebook and YouTube have taken down Bolsonaro's video. Both companies said he violated their policies. In the video, Bolsonaro had attributed the claim to a UK government report, which was inaccurate.
Facebook and YouTube have taken down a video of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, one in which he falsely claimed COVID-19 vaccines were linked to developing AIDS. In a statement on Monday, Facebook said, quote, "Our policies don't allow claims that COVID-19 vaccines kill or seriously harm people." YouTube confirmed it took the same step later in the day because the video, which was recorded last week, violated their misinformation policies. In addition to removing the video, local media reported YouTube has suspended Bolsonaro's account for a week. His videos have been removed before. Over the summer, the far-right leader recommended using hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin against COVID-19, despite scientific evidence that the drugs are not effective treatments. Bolsonaro's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. According to a UN HIV and AIDS program, approved COVID-19 vaccines are safe for most people, including those who live with HIV, the virus that causes acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, known as AIDS.
The European Union has approved the use of Moderna booster vaccines for people aged 18 years and above at least 6 months after they received their second dose. The approval comes after data showed that a third dose given 6 to 8 months after the second dose led to a rise in antibody levels in adults whose levels were naturally declining. The EMA also said that the risk of inflammatory heart conditions or other very rare side effects after a booster is being monitored. It is the second COVID-19 booster vaccine to be approved in the EU after giving the nod to Pfizer earlier this month. The EU drug watchdog had suggested offering a third dose of a shot from either Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna for people with weakened immune systems, but it left the EU member states to decide if the wider population should receive a booster shot. Amid a surge in Delta variant cases, several EU member states had launched their own booster campaigns much before the agency guidelines to revive economies and avoid lockdowns in the winter. The EU Medical Agency said that the implementation of vaccination campaigns remains at the dispensation of the advisory groups guiding each EU member state. US authorities have already authorised booster doses of Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. The EU and Iran officials are set to meet in Brussels this week to restart negotiations over Iran's nuclear deal. This comes as the UN nuclear watchdog said that Iran is once again expanding its uranium enrichment program beyond the permitted limit. The IAEA said that the latest activity is likely to help Iran refine its enrichment process, but it does not involve keeping the product and so won't boost Iran's production of uranium enriched to close to weapons grade. But the IAEA has reacted by increasing its monitoring of activities at the above-ground pilot fuel enrichment plant at Natanz. Officials from Tehran and the EU will meet in Brussels to resume talks with all parties. In Washington, the State Department said that while the US was supportive of the EU's engagement, the ultimate destination had to be Vienna's.
The EU is the JCPOA coordinator, and we are very supportive of the EU's engagement with Iran in that capacity. That said, as I made the point the other day, the ultimate destination needs to be Vienna. The ultimate destination cannot be any other European capital or European city. What we believe, what our European allies believe, what our other P5+1 partners, in this case Russia and the PRC, believe, is that the JCPOA, a mutual return to it, continues to be the best and the most effective means to ensure that, once again, Iran is subject to permanent and verifiable limits on its nuclear program and can never acquire a nuclear weapon.
The US has indicated that it's losing patience waiting for Tehran to come back to the negotiating table. A US official said the efforts to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal was at a critical phase and warned that if talks failed, it would use other methods at its disposal to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. The agreement between Iran and world powers to find a long-term solution to Iran's controversial nuclear program was thrown into uncertainty when former US President Donald Trump walked out of the deal in May 2018 and imposed sweeping sanctions. This led to Iran towards violating the deal's agreement, but now US under President Biden is once again clamouring to re-enter it. The talks, however, have made little headway. Apart from the US, the deal also involves Britain, France, Germany, China and Russia. International rights group Amnesty International has decided to shut its offices in Hong Kong because of draconian national security laws. The rights group says the law has made it effectively impossible for them to work freely without risk of reprisals. Hong Kong has been witnessing an intensified crackdown on pro-democracy voices and rights groups. This year, the national security law has forced at least 35 groups to disband.
Rights group Amnesty International will shut its offices in Hong Kong by the end of this year. That decision was driven by Hong Kong's national security law. In a statement on Monday, the group said the China-imposed law has, quote, made it effectively impossible for human rights organizations in Hong Kong to work freely and without fear of serious reprisals from the government. In the past, Hong Kong had served as one of Asia's leading NGO hubs, with groups drawn to its robust rule of law and autonomy that was promised for Hong Kong after the control of the former British colony was returned to Beijing in 1997. But since the implementation of the security law last year, authorities have crushed a once vibrant civil society and curbed free speech and protests. At least 35 prominent groups have disbanded, including several leading trade unions, NGOs and professional groups. While some groups have relocated to Taiwan, others are urgently shredding files and deleting photos and online material, fearing even once innocuous details could be used against them under Hong Kong's evolving security regime. Hong Kong and Chinese authorities say the national security law enshrines individual rights, justifying the laws as necessary to restore stability after mass protest in 2019, when millions took to the streets over many months. There is no immediate response from the Hong Kong government to a Reuters request for comment.
Taiwan-controlled Kinmen Island is less than 3 kilometres from the Chinese coast. But even though tensions continue to escalate between China and Taiwan, there is little sense of alarm there. The island houses several military outposts from the 1949 Civil War and from the height of the Cold War in 1958. It's also home to many war veterans. But the island's administration is working hard to promote the island as more than just a war monument.
Some 3 kilometers from China's coast is Taiwan's controlled Kinmen Island. Sitting on the front line between Taiwan and China, Kinmen is the last place where the two engaged in major fighting in 1958 at the height of the Cold War. The memories of that war remain burned into minds decades later. This is Chen Ingwen. He describes how he used to shoot flares and Chinese trawlers that got too close. He says that soldiers at other posts would shoot their rifles at the vessels.
At night you could hear the sound of the machines turning louder and louder. Then our cannons down there in the plains that we just passed would start to fire off flares. Once the flares lit up, we could see, oh my God, a bunch of ships have already approached. After the initial scare, we would start calling Camp Command, to which they would tell us to just deal with it ourselves. Then after we fired flares, the recruits over at Mashan and Hoyu would load their rifles and start shooting.
Tensions between China and Taiwan have spiked in recent months, with mass incursions by Chinese Air Force into Taiwan's air defense zone. China's actions have set off alarm in Taipei and Western capitals that Beijing may be planning something more dramatic.
As a former soldier and also as a modest citizen, I think that peace is the most important. With peace, everyone is a winner, whereas if war happens, everyone will lose. That's what I think.
Kinmen, along with Matsu Archipelago, has been held by the government in Taipei since the defeated Republic of China forces fled to Taiwan in 1949 after losing the civil war with the communists. Regular shelling did not end till 1978 when Washington formally recognized Beijing over Taipei. The memory of the shelling still haunts older Kinmeners.
Of course, everyone is afraid of war. But I hope there can be peace in the Taiwanese Strait. I hope that we can join hands and get along. If there are any problems, we can sit down and talk it out. We should not ignite the fuse of war. If we can't pave the road for this, then coming generations will have no worries in their lives.
Unlike Taiwan, many people in Kinmen openly call themselves Chinese.
I think that both sides of the Taiwan Strait, as grandchildren of the Chinese emperor, of course some have come to Taiwan a bit earlier, some a bit later. But we should not be differentiating between mainlanders and islanders. We should all get along and promote our Chinese culture together.
We've all seen this before. The younger generation has no idea. Those of us who have lived through this are less afraid, but of course we would still be scared. In case of war, we would have to hide in air raid shelters again.
A much-reduced military garrison remains on Kinmen Island, way down from 100,000 at the height of fighting. Kinmen's administration is working hard to promote the island as more than just a war monument. But the remnants of war are everywhere, from bunkers on the beach to anti-landing fortifications lining the shores and tanks rumbling through the back streets. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Well, that's all we have time for on today's WION Live Broadcast from London. But for more global news and updates, stay tuned to WION, World is One.
This is right, Arab.